This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 51.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers, with your host, Ramzi Majaba. Ramzi loves reading bedtime stories for his boys.
Hello, SE Nation, and welcome to yet another episode. For those joining me for the first time, my name is Ramzi Majaba, and I'm a sales engineer out of Ottawa, Canada. The purpose of WeTheSalesEngineers.com is to create a community of aspiring and current sales engineers so we can all learn from each other and grow together. Some new news today. I've started a YouTube channel. Yeehaw! I only have a couple of videos up there that are not podcast related. I have all the podcasts up there and 2 new videos. So check it out. The channel is We the Sales Engineers because I'm being original. The link to that channel will be on WeTheSalesEngineers.com/show51, as well as all the show notes from today's discussion. Speaking of today's discussion, the interview was with Craig Waters. He hails all the way from Australia, but now lives in the Bay Area. He's done a lot of different jobs in his career, but he also did sales engineering before he moved to product management role. I like this conversation. It was fun. I just got the feeling that Craig cares in general. Like, he just cares about the community. He cares about sales engineers, and he wants to give back. We talk about his career, the process he went through to decide which job he should take. And you'll hear it. It took him like 2 years, sometimes just looking at the market. So I enjoyed it. I hope you guys enjoy it too. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Craig. Good afternoon, Craig. How are you?
I'm good, mate. How are you doing today?
I am very good. Well, thank you for being on. I do appreciate it. And we met through Twitter. And I am very interested in your career and how you progressed. So I decided I wanted to chat with you. Do you mind explaining who you are to the listeners? There are no viewers. And what you do.
Just us with the viewers, I think. Yeah. So, yeah, sure. So my name's Craig Waters. I've had an interesting career in the last few years. I mean, today, mostly I am involved in product management and solution architecture for a converged solution for the current vendor that I work for is a company called Pure Storage. And as the name suggests, it's data enterprise storage products that we produce, but I'm not necessarily a storage expert. I'm much more involved around the converged solution that we build in partnership with some of the other vendors in the industry at the moment. So, that's kind of me in a nutshell at this point in time.
Okay, and you mentioned you were really adamant about talking about the career path and how you got to where you are. It seems like an interesting topic, and I'm looking at LinkedIn. You've been around. So how did you get to where you are?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. Yeah, and I like your style, Ramzi, because I used to run a podcast years ago called V Catch Up, and that's what I used to do. Is I always compared it to there was a show in the UK where they used to do an interview, and it was like the guy would kind of do a lot of research about the person they're interviewing, and then they would go and like talk candidly about some of those aspects of that person's career. And that was kind of what I tried to emulate to some degree. Is it's important to do homework and understand who the person is you're kind of interviewing. So I acknowledge that and appreciate it as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I'm kind of the generalist. I've always been a generalist, right? And it kind of spans back way back so I'm an old guy, like I'm 47 now. Yeah. So I used to be, when I got involved in IT originally, it was, there was 20 floppy disks to go and install Windows 95, and we were on 386 servers. And so it was kind of a long time ago. And my first technical kind of where I cut my teeth was around Novell. So that kind of shows the how long ago it was. Yeah. Great technical product, but just not very good sales teams, I think, around the technology. But what kind of really happened was that I spent a lot of time in the integrator space. So I worked in, value-added resellers, really providing professional services to organizations around that transition from, Novell into Windows and then into VMware. And that kind of spanned, a good like 10 years or so of my life. And then I kind of got into, I had my wife, we started having children, those sort of things. And so I couldn't be as mobile, and I couldn't kind of be across all these different organizations and be on the road all the time. So I kind of settled a bit, and I got I term it now as being the golden handcuffs. And what I mean by the golden handcuffs is that I got a job in working for a government agency, and it was a contract role. So it was very lucrative from a cash perspective, but it was the golden handcuffs because I don't know if you know how it works in government agencies. And I'm not bagging government agencies. I think they're a great organization to work within. But projects typically, there could be a lot of politics, a lot of corporate politics. So projects that would typically take maybe months would take maybe years. There's a lot of overhead in working in those corporate environments. And so when after I had some kids and I was probably in that role about like 7 or 8 years, I really wanted to do something different. And I kind of sat back then and like looked at the market and looked at what I was doing at that time. As a practitioner, I'd gone from being I was help desk earlier on. I went into support, and then I went into, being a systems engineer or a service engineer within the organization, and then into an architect role. And I was servicing a couple of customers in an architect role when I kind of transitioned to this kind of corporate position in a government agency. And I kind of felt I got to kind of the pinnacle where I could being a practitioner. And so I really wanted to do something different. And at that point in time, this was like, probably about 2010, 2011, somewhere around there. There was this big change around, virtualization and virtual machines, and then the impact of that as far as things like AWS and Azure and public cloud becoming a thing. And so it was a real inflection point for me at that point in time. And really, I kind of looked at the industry and thought I had two options. And the first option was around going to a service provider. So, being a practitioner, but doing it at scale, where I could see large scale environments and be involved, get to grips with things like automation, orchestration, and start, trying to solve problems and trying to, configure solutions in a massive scale. Or the other option was then to look at working for a vendor. And in a vendor process, I kind of distilled it into, there was like 2 or 3 options. There was like a systems engineer style role, or some kind of an architect overlay role. So what I mean by that is more of a where you're a subject matter expert. So you're an overlay above the SE. So the SE would have a particular use case for a customer, but they want to go to the next level with that customer and talk about the integration, the technologies, and the capabilities based upon the vendor product that they're trying to sell into that customer. And so I'd be brought in then as a subject matter expert, so I could go into a lot deeper of like how we integrate these. It could be like something around like vSphere for VMware, for example, or Hyper-V for Microsoft, or it could be more of a solution component that was making up the architecture. So it could be like Cisco UCS or those kind of pieces. And so you can be much more in depth in those kind of components that make up the solution. And the reality is, Ramsey, was that service provider piece looked really interesting, but they didn't pay anything. In their mind, it was like, we want to get more for less. We want to do more for less. So it was optimization, but they didn't see the value of the technical skill set to be able to help them optimize that capability. And so, at the end of the day, you've got to pay the bills. You've got to look after the wife and kids and stuff. So really, that was what kind of steered me to being in the vendor space. But that was a 2-year kind of study that I went through to kind of come to that conclusion. Okay. From being on the customer space to actually being in the vendor space.
Right. Couple quick questions. You mentioned value-added resellers. Could you explain what that means a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So there's, it is basically an integrator. When you look at integrators, that they're structured in a couple of different ways, and typically you have integrators that are focused very much on the pre-sales and the actual, I know the term would be something like the box shifting, so selling products into customers, and their organization is very dominantly built around the capabilities to sell those products to customers. So having that, the account manager looking after commercials, and then the sales engineer looking after the the pre-sales creation of the solution, walking the customer through the sales process, all that kind of stuff. With the value-added reseller, it's just kind of actually having an extra dimension where not only are we there to kind of sell the product, but then the value-added reseller has professional services capabilities. So not only are they selling the product, they've got the ability to kind of not just deploy and configure the technology within a customer's organization, but be more consultative with the customers to say, well, let's look at the solution. Let's look at the business problem you want to solve. Let's build a holistic solution around to solve that business problem. And then let's look at how we deliver that technology to you, not just as a bunch of products, but actually as a holistic solution. And then the handover and the operational management of that solution. And then, with that, I mean, obviously it's a longer sales cycle. It's a bigger opportunity, but it basically means, and as well as a lot of knock on as far as like what capabilities that value-added reseller can offer to that customer, and that kind of then, that's kind of a tier 2 scale. And then you've got the tier 1s, which is like the GSIs, the global system integrators, where, your Accentures and your PwCs and all those sort of things, where that's all they do. They don't actually do the product sale. They actually look at the business requirements and build a solution based upon that.
So you're moving from a commodities type sale to like the solution sale.
Yeah. And I think that adds much more stickiness to the customer, because you can then have that, you can be much more of a trusted advisor. You can build that relationship with the customer. And it's not just in and out, or, sold my product, where's the next customer? It's actually an ongoing relationship that you're building with that customer. There's value that you're adding beyond just the problem that those products solve.
Yeah. Well, that's not the topic of discussion today, but I do want to note that it's the hardest thing to sell is the commodities, because it always comes down to price. Almost everything is equal. Like a Honda, Toyota, whatever, just whatever is cheaper, I'm going to buy that, or whichever I like more. So,
but if you can do, if you can do a sell based upon the benefits that solution provides to a customer, that can go beyond the value of the goods. Do you know what I mean? Like, so if there's a benefit, if there's if there's a capability that technology offers to the customer that's unique, then there's a value that's being sold on top of the cost of goods, if you like.
Yeah. So I was talking to a gentleman, his name is Bill Lapp, last week, and he was talking about he sold based on differentiations. He found those benefits that only his product creates, and that's what he focused on selling, versus just trying to sell everything, because then you have no differentiation.
Business value selling, I think that's the terminology.
Yeah, well, everybody always tells us sell on value, but if you're talking about like two things that are equal, it's kind of hard to sell on value, and that's when you have to dig deep and find whatever you're more valuable than the other one. You mentioned that the government was like a golden handcuff, so you got paid well, but it seems like you didn't enjoy the role.
Well, I wouldn't say I didn't enjoy it. I mean, I learned a lot from the role, because I learned about stakeholder management. I learned about identifying. I mean, to me, that was where I cut my teeth in identifying the business problem and doing, what would you say, like problem analysis? Determining what. Okay, they want to do this technology, but why? What's the benefit? Because before that, being a practitioner, I'd very much be a case of like, okay, I've got the new shiny thing, right? Let's go and implement it because it's going to solve everything. Actually, what's the requirements? What's the what are we actually trying to solve here? And it really kind of cut my teeth being more consultative from an architect perspective, because it wasn't just about shiny objects. It was more about, let's do problem definition. Let's understand the different BUs within the organization and what their requirements are. The application owners or the BU owners themselves, about understanding what their challenges were, what they're trying to solve in the business. And so it really kind of cut my teeth on being more consultative. But the challenge was that even understanding those requirements and building competitive use cases internally around why they should invest in this technology or invest in this capability, it was still a long cycle of like, justification then to IT management, justification to the business around, actually buying into the solution, getting the right vendors involved, and so it was a long sales cycle basically at the end of the day. But it did teach me a lot about business engagement and business analysis, as opposed to just clear cut. Oh, here's the technology. I've got I know how to deploy it and configure it and manage it. What are we using it for though? That's kind of
Okay. And you mentioned the term systems engineer. That's synonymous to sales engineer, correct?
Yeah. I mean, the difference being is that it's internal to an organization and not part of a pre-sales entity, basically. Yeah.
Okay. Well, in my old job, I was a sales engineer, but my official title was systems engineer. So sometimes it means the same thing. And
yeah, there's a lot of nomenclature around it. Yeah. No, I understand where you're coming from completely. I mean, I guess maybe I'm trying to differentiate from being support engineer versus being project orientated. So in a customer environment, it might be that you've got people whose jobs are to keep the lights on, BAU, the business as usual activities. And then what you'll have is people that are kind of involved more in the new projects of like delivering new capabilities within the business. But part of their role then is this handover. So something becomes new, but then it has to become operationalized so that at some point it becomes part of that business as usual activity. Excuse me.
Okay. And go ahead.
Oh yeah. Well, I was going to continue the story, but if you've got other questions, I'm happy to.
Just one more question before we move on.
Go for it. Yeah.
You mentioned that the service provider wasn't going to pay as much as a systems engineer, or at least they didn't value the skills of an engineer. Do you think that's typical between other vendors, other service providers as well, or is it just specific?
I think it's general to the. This is my opinion. Okay, so we'll get that clear, but I think it's general to the service provider industry, because basically, we're a enterprise or a commercial business would sweat an asset for 3 to 5 years. Like in a service provider, it's more about getting much more out of that asset. So they might sweat an asset even longer than that time period. So they want to get more for less, and then they're kind of constrained around. Well, they only want to buy so much inventory to cover their current customers, but they've got to have some kind of overhead so that they can introduce new customers, or they've got to be able to design a solution that they're running so that they've got the ability to scale it linearly to customer growth, and so in that kind of environment, they want to operationalize differently, they want to manage and maintain differently, and it's all about cost economics. It's all about, as I say, sweating the asset longer, but also having lesser overhead from an operational standpoint. So, and then there are other things as well. Like a service provider is a 24/7 operation. So then there's things like the shift work, or the times that you're there, or the times that you're providing the service, those sort of things. So while the idea of being in a service provider did sound quite interesting, when you peel away the covers and look at it, it was kind of more of it was more of a similar situation as to being within the kind of not operational but more project side of working within a customer.
Okay.
So it wasn't really that much of a change. That's kind of where I was going to get into.
No, that's fair. And you chose to go systems engineering role.
Yeah. So I chose a vendor role. Now that predicates as well as a couple of things. So during that 2-year period of me kind of like assessing the market and determining how I could evolve beyond working in a customer, in an organization that's, that their primary focus isn't technology. That this could be a law firm, it could be a oil and gas company, it could be a financial institution, whatever. IT is seen as a tool to further their business. It's not core to their business necessarily. So I think that's kind of the other side of the piece there that's kind of quite interesting. But during that 2-year period of time, to get into a vendor role, there's certain things that you have to be able to do. To get into a pre-sales role, there's certain things that you have to be able to do that aren't kind of on the normal cart of being a practitioner or working internally within an organization. They're soft skills, so things like, public speaking, presenting, being able to respond to things like RFPs, or those kind of soft skill sets that, so good documentation skills, those sort of soft skill sets that aren't typically provided or aren't typically kind of sought for being a practitioner within working for a company. And quite frankly, I'm sure, I felt like this for a long time. If someone said to me, "Oh, go and stand up in front of 200 people and present on your, what the topic of what you delivered last week," it'd scare the bejesus out of a lot of people. And so, scared the hell out of me for a long time as well. But I knew that, to get into those kind of roles, to be customer facing, then you have to kind of take on some of those soft skills. And so at the time, I was this architect working in this government agency. And so I felt as if, I'll explain the kind of the terminology, but I felt as though I was like a big fish in a little pond. And what I mean by that is that I was I'd be the guy that everyone would go to for a particular technology domain. I'd be the specialist, if you like, within that organization. And so a lot of people that I would talk to, either they were not technical or they had some technical knowledge, but I was seen to be the subject matter expert. And so because of that, it was a very lonely situation, because I had no peers that I could go to and say, well, I'm doing this thing with vSphere and I need to know about X, Y, Z. And at the time, things like, excuse me, things like, chats and blog posts and those sort of things were beginning to come a thing. Like Twitter had just kind of started, but there wasn't any forums that you could go to other than, like the vSphere VMTN community website or something like that, where you could talk to other people and actually bounce ideas. "Oh, I'm having this problem. How do I fix it?" Nowadays you just type in Google and you get the answer straight away, because everyone's blogged about it, or someone's fixed the problem, or the KB article covers it, whatever. So to get out of that as well and to kind of develop those soft skills, I decided, well, I want to go and meet other people who are in a similar situation to me, so I can bounce ideas off them. I can meet them, I can socialize with them, but at the same time, I can learn something from somebody else. And so I got involved in the VMware user group, right? And that was the local user group. I was living in Australia at the time. And basically that to me was a huge catalyst. I joined it as a participant, so as an observer. But I soon realized that really the value of the user group is around stepping up and actually contributing. And Ramsey, this is why you're doing things like podcasts and stuff yourself. Is that it's enough to be a passive observer, but if you really want to get value out of something, you need to be a contributor. You need to be contributing and creating something. You need to get out of your comfort zone, basically.
Right. Yeah.
And so I saw that as being the mechanism to do that. And within probably 2 or 3 months, I actually became the leader of that user group. And then I spent, probably the next 3 or 4 years doing things like organizing quarterly meetings, getting vendors to sponsor those meetings. We did user conferences, all-day user conference events. So we'd get speakers, from the US to come and present. So it sounds like a lot of work. There's a lot of work. There's a lot of logistics work there. But at the same time, I would public speak. I'd speak in front of 400 people when we had the all-day user conference. I'd actually, part of the role was actually mentoring some of the guys that were coming up in the user group to be confident to be able to do public speaking. So for them to present on their, like a technical presentation about something that they're knowledgeable about, and sharing that in a way where it adds value to the rest of the community, building a community around this event. Meeting the speakers, meeting the vendors who would sponsor the sessions, and that 2 or 3 year period just really kind of built all these soft skill sets that were required for me to be ready to kind of get into that kind of vendor opportunity.
I did have a question. So you may have already answered it, but I'm going to ask it anyways. You mentioned that you were asked to go talk in front of a few hundred people, and that scared I think your word was the bejesus out of you. So how did you get over it? By just keep doing it over and over, or how did you get over it?
Pretty much.
Okay.
So again, like I think there's two things to this, right? One is just practice. I mentioned earlier before you started recording, I was saying, what happens is you get to a point where you create a style, and then you're able to very quickly be able to present a topic that you might not know something about, because you build a storyline around the information that's being presented around the slides or the content that you want to deliver to the end audience. And so you develop that, and that comes over time. Practice. Do it. Like the first time it'll be awful, the second time it'll be awful, the third time it might be awful, but it'll get better.
Okay.
And as it gets better, then you start to notice different things. You start to notice things like the actual, how you move physically actually has a better engagement to the audience than what actually comes out of your mouth, which sounds really crazy because everyone wants to listen to what you're saying, but your actual movements and how you move as an individual actually impacts how that information is being delivered. So you start to learn, you get over being scared about it. And the one piece of information that kind of really drove me and changed me in how to do public speaking was this idea that if you watch on the news or something, and the news presenter will come up to an athlete, he's just run, they just ran the 100 meters in under 9 seconds or something, and they'll come up to the guy and they'll say like, you just ran in front of like 200,000 people. How do you feel? And the guy would be saying, I'm really excited. Are you not nervous about this then? And it's like, no, I've been really, I've been ready to go. I've been really pumped up. And what I kind of learned through some of the content in learning about public speaking is that it's natural to feel nervous, right? But nervous, like, are you nervous or are you actually excited about doing something? And if you can channel that energy into something positive, I know it sounds a bit corny, but if you can channel that energy into something positive, you can actually use it to augment how you present and how you speak. And it's an asset then. It's not a liability. It's not something, I feel really scared about doing this. Oh no, I feel really excited about doing this. And you can change how you deliver something just by that small attitude and mental adjustment in yourself, and it's those kind of learning those kind of aspects turns you from being an all right public speaker to someone that people will actually listen to. And again, there's a time aspect to it, but then as you grow and learn, you learn why things happen the way they are, and you learn to be able to actually use that situation to your advantage and be able to deliver something that's kind of compelling and interesting to the audience,
Oh, that's perfect. And you mentioned that you were part of a community, online community where you were contributing and all that. But you mentioned initially you were just an observer. And if you're like most engineers are kind of introverts and may not want to put themselves out there because they're afraid they might say something stupid, right? So how do you get over that and start contributing?
Yeah, so I like to use the example of what I did with Twitter, how I started with Twitter. So, Twitter's this situation where you basically go online and all these people talk to each other and they have some knowledge of who they are. And you kind of sit there and go, well, I want to get involved in this, but what do I need to do? How do I actually contribute to this community? And so I think first of all, that you have to observe how others behave to learn how to behave yourself. Yeah, I think that's just nurture and nature of life. Yeah. So, how I approached Twitter was that I'd find, blog posts of people that I found interesting. I would find content that I found interesting, and I would follow those individuals. And then what I'd do is I'd find those individuals and I'd see who they followed as well. And so I'd build up a community of like maybe a couple of hundred people who I wanted to follow, and then I'd start interjecting into their conversations. And Twitter is kind of a funny thing because it's like this. It can be very overwhelming and daunting initially. It's like this massive river that flows of information all the time, but you don't have to swim in it all the time. You can just, a friend of mine once recommended. He said, Twitter's like this big river. Just scoop up and have a drink and get a taste and just, have another drink if you want, but you don't have to kind of consume it all in one go. And so, over time, I think what happens is you meet individuals, and then my recommendation as well is that, as part of this kind of social media thing is either go to a user group locally. You've got Meetup these days, so it's really easy to find user groups and information that's of interest, like topics of interest. And then also conferences as well. I mean, we're not always in a position to be able to go to a conference, but if we can, it's an investment, right? So if we can articulate the value to our employers, if we can get that buy-in to them. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's been instances where I've paid myself to go to a conference. The first conference I went to for VMworld back in 2012, I paid for, because I was a VMworld leader, they gave me a ticket, but that was the impetus for me then to go and buy a flight and actually, I actually bunked up with a friend. We shared a room with 2 beds in the end, so, but it was the enabler for me to say, right, whereas I'd be like, oh yeah, I'd like to have gone to a conference. I'd be like, no, I'm going to go. I'm going to give this, and that opened a whole new world for me. That whole, being at a conference and meeting these people who I spoke to on Twitter. It's a lot of work. You've got to get out there. You've got to, but there's still that physical contact aspect to it as well. Twitter's great because it means then that you'll never ever go to a conference again and not know anybody.
Yeah, that's true.
You build these relationships, and then those relationships are then founded by having that face to face. You go to the blogger tables at VMworld at the community area and just say, I'm so and so. I spoke to you the other week. And you get that name to a handle, face to a handle kind of. It's very rewarding, and it kind of really builds your confidence in how you operate within that community. Well, we were kind of talking about it a bit before. Just be sincere, be honest. We all get things wrong. Don't worry about it. Everyone makes mistakes. That's just being human, yeah. But just have a code of conduct. Like don't badmouth your competitors. Don't troll. Just at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and so you just have to recognize that, I think.
That's perfect. We are running out of time right now. I am curious. You went from sales engineer and you chose to go into product management. Why did you make that change?
So I've been in sales probably for about 4 years as this overlay role that I was talking about before, and I enjoyed it, but I actually covered APJ as a region, so it's a very large region. And look, I'll predicate this. I've worked for this same vendor for 5 years now. So everything I talk about here is a tunnel of my experiences in this particular vendor. Right. I'm sure if I work for a different vendor, they may vary. All I'm trying to say is these are my experiences, and so I'm not trying to color it by any means or anything like that. I'm just trying to be straight up and say this is what happened to me, and hope you can learn from my experiences, sort of thing. So, but I had this overlay role. It was a really large area that I covered, so I was on the road a lot, and I kind of made this kind of decision that it was a decision and it was an opportunity. I made this decision that I wanted to be, see my kids more. I wanted to be. I mean, there's benefits from being, working in a vendor. I think you've talked about them before. It's not a 9 to 5, and so you do have time to drop the kids at school. You do have time to do other things as well. It's not strictly a 9 to 5 go into the office kind of lifestyle, but I just found that being an overlay in a really large area that I would spend a lot of time on a plane. That being said, I did have the chance to go and take the kids to school in the morning, those sort of things, but just not every day.
When you were home.
Yeah, exactly. So there's good and bad to it, but I wanted to kind of spend more time with my family, and so this is kind of the irony of the situation. Is like I was saying before, I was very vocal within the company around this particular product, this converged solution that I work on now, and so being very vocal within the sales team, it kind of came to the point where it was like, well, if you think you can do better, why don't you come to the US and why don't you manage the project, and I'll be the product manager and actually see where you can take it. And so that was kind of a challenge accepted sort of thing. I'm really into kind of, I've obviously had to convince my wife and that to kind of join me, and that to me, I enjoyed being in sales. I learned a lot about the sales process. I've learned a lot about the sausage factory and how vendors work, and the whole process of sales, and but to me, I'm an engineer at heart. I was a practitioner way before going into the sales team within an organization. It's just that because I lived in Australia, because it was a satellite region, the only option I had to join a vendor was to be as part of the sales team, So, but this opportunity to move to Mountain View was basically an option to actually be part of the engineering team. And so to be focused more on product development and product management and working with developers and taking, and I think that's the insight I've got is I've worked in the customer and the partner spaces. So I find it very easy to talk to customers about what their issues are and what challenges they're facing with aspects of the products that we deliver as part of the organization, and then taking that and understanding, the impact of being able to improve that product, and then the marketable value of that change within the organization, within the sales team, and then being able to work with the development team to actually build that capability and then offer it out to end customers, And so while that, and I think we kind of talked about it before, while I got a pay cut, I took a pay cut in moving in those roles. Where I am now is that I'm actually, as well, I'm doing just fine as I was before, because I've gone through the process of, being in the US and being in the region I'm in the US. There's much more pay reviews going on. There's much more structure reviews going on than what I had when I was in a satellite office out of Australia. So it was a risk, and every decision we make in this world, there's a risk and return associated with it. But I think it's paid off, and now it's kind of another piece of the jigsaw around how I understand how a business works, how to go to market works, how organizations structure sales, engineering, marketing, those different kind of components that make up a business. I feel I'm a more rounded professional because I've got visibility into those different aspects of how an organization functions.
Okay. All right. Well, I think it's a good time to move on to the not so fire round. We might have to do it in a fire round succession, though. So maybe we'll go from there. So, what is the one thing you love about being in product management today?
So I touched on it before. I think the biggest thing I love is meeting with customers and talking to customers and understanding what their problems are, and seeing how there's something I can build, or I can work with a team of people to build to solve that problem. And what's interesting is I've kind of come full circle, because I used to be the customer that had the problem. So I really identify with that issue, and I understand the challenges that creates for that customer. So having the power and having the ability to say, hey, let me understand that problem. Let's get this right here. Maybe we can do something to solve it so that it makes your lives easier, So to me, that's the number one thing, really, I think, ultimately.
And that is common between product management and sales engineering.
Definitely. Yeah. I think the difference is that when you're a sales, you have to kind of you have to go through the process internally within the organization to get that problem raised so that somebody does something about it. So you don't have control over actually determining whether that problem is big enough or the organization's got enough resources to deal with that problem. Whereas in product management, I've got the ability to justify that because I own that aspect of a product. And so it's, I'm the business owner for that. So it's my call, I own it to some degree, and it could be the wrong call as well. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But I like to think that because I understand the customer situation, that I can add something beyond that, in that case. Yeah.
I like to think of him as a sales engineer can solve a problem with what he has today. A product manager can save a problem with what he can do tomorrow. So. Yeah.
I've heard you say that before, and I think that's spot on.
I thought I just came up with it on the spot, but okay.
No.
What is there one thing you would change? Is there something you would change about your job?
Let's think. I'd like to. I mean, a lot of the constraints I have in my role right now is related to the size and growth of the organization that I'm in. So you tend to find that you do a lot of jobs outside of what your kind of remit is, and that's just the nature of the size of the organization and the area that I'm in. I'd like, sometimes I kind of think about, well, it would be great if it was a larger organization because I'd be able to specialize more. But then, on the reverse of that, with it being under resourced, sometimes it's good because it means you can make stuff up and be a bit more creative in what you do. So yeah, it would be interesting to do it in a larger organization where there's more resources, but whether that would make it better or not, I'm not too sure yet.
The grass is always greener on the other side.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that I want to be clear on that. That's the thing is, I kind of said it before, I've only had this experience in one organization, and so obviously every organization is different, and so if I represent something as being a challenge or a constraint, it's just due to me having only one experience of it. I need to go and find the user group for product managers and kind of try and talk to them and understand other people's perspective of it, I think.
Well, here's my experience. The bigger the company is, the slower things get. So,
yeah.
Is there a book or resource that every sales engineer should read?
Well, we talked about this before. It's the Bible that we were talking about, the Mastering Technical Sales. I mean, when I first started in SE, that I was told that was the one book that you need to pick up and read, and I read that religiously end to end. I read the chapters in different orders, but I read it was Bible for me, and I think you can't go wrong if you're starting out on an SE journey of having that book in your bag ready to kind of pick up and use. I think it's a very good resource. Yeah.
Right. Perfect. Well, I think we can end here. So that was a perfect way to end. And I'm sure John would appreciate it. John Kerr would appreciate the endorsement of his book. So we're going to get going now. I appreciate your time, Greg. Like, I know it's during the day for you, like midday. So I appreciate you taking time from work to do this with us.
Yeah, no problems, Ramsey. Thanks for asking me. I really appreciate it. And, if there's a chance, I'd love to have another discussion with you because, there's a lot more I think I could share around it, particularly around the developing your soft skills and then building that career path. And I just say to your listeners as well, my Twitter handle's @CSWaters1. So reach out, and if there's anything I can do to help anybody, I'm more than, it's a giving community that we have here, and you can't show your expression of gratitude better than offering help to help somebody else. And so I'd be happy to do that anytime. Yeah.
Yeah. So for those who can't remember your handle, it's going to be in the show notes at show 51. So
awesome. Thanks.
We'll do that.
Thanks, Ramsey. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah. Thanks
My
for
pleasure.
inviting me.
And we'll set up a time to do it, to do another interview.
I'd like to. Yeah. That'd be great. Yeah.
Perfect.
Thanks,
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, man.
Bye. Thank you, Craig, for your time and openness. I am scheduling a follow-up interview with Craig in the next few weeks. If you have a specific question you want to ask him, if you're curious about the SE role or the product management role, hit us up on at WeTheSEs on Twitter, and Craig's Twitter handle is CSWaters1. Just a reminder, check out the YouTube channel, We the Sales Engineers. I'm posting new material there on a bi-weekly basis at this point. If you have any questions you want me to answer on a video, hit me up on Twitter as well. Thank you guys for listening all the way through. Show notes are at wethesalesengineers.com/show51. I look forward to chatting with you next week. With that, this is Ramsey, signing off. I'll say something to the effect that, my wife will say something to the effect, Ramsey just has his first guest to tell him to shut up. And I'll put that in there. So. All right,
Craig, it's time to shut up.
You ready to get going? We're never going to start. Ready to get going?
Yeah, let's go, man.
Right.
Let's go.